One of the more overlooked aspects of anatomy is looking at breathing mechanics. Breathing mechanics have a massively worldview in terms of what impact they can have on you and your clients. They can impact mobility both in the upper body and the shoulder and the hip and lower body, as well as affect our stress response, how anxious we feel, and how well we recover from training. So this is something in the early stage with a client it's important to try and work on and to get right. So when looking at this from an anatomy perspective, the first muscle we're going to talk about is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a dome-shaped muscle that sits underneath the rib cage. So what happens when we take a deep breath in? We're going to expand this rib cage as the diaphragm will start to flatten. This will pull the external organs down into the abdominal cavity and push this out, giving space for the lungs to expand and move. Then, as we take our exhale, we're going to have our obliques and other muscles of the core pull this rib cage down and in. And that's how it should work in a very healthy breathing mechanic kind of way. But unfortunately, we have a lot of people now that spend a lot of time mouth breathing, a lot of time chronically stressed, leading to these short and sharp breathing patterns, meaning that we never fully get this full expansion and full exhale depression. So when looking at your clients, one of the ways you can tell if there's a faulty breathing pattern is obviously one, just listen to where they're breathing from, but also two, look at what we call an infrasternal angle. So we've got a sternum here and the angle of the rib cage. If they're chronically in a really low angle, they're probably stuck in this exhalation pattern, and you want to expand this rib cage out a little bit. I'm going to go through a few exercises in a second that will help us do this. Alternatively, if you're on this wide infrasternal angle, you may want to focus more on things that are going to get a full exhale and expand the rib cage front to back. The rib cage in ideal way should expand like a pump handle and like a bucket handle, but often we don't see that. So issues that may arise with a dysfunctional breathing pattern is first, if the diaphragm is not moving well and allowing this rib cage to expand, our body will prioritize always things that will allow us to walk and breathe. We need breathing for survival. So we're going to find other accessory muscles that their main job isn't to expand the rib cage, now have to pick up the slack from the diaphragm. So this is why people with poor breathing mechanics will often find their pecs are really, really tight. They might get a lot of tension headaches, and they might feel very, very tight through the traps, because the traps and the pecs are going to assist in what slack this is giving up. From the lower body perspective, we may also see, because the diaphragm has a fascial attachment to the psoas, the hip flexor. So if we're in this position where we have this flared rib cage, which in turn is going to allow us to lean back a little bit, we might find the pelvis will dump forward, over lengthening the rib cage and causing weakness in that hip flexor. We'll also find, if we're not expanding very well, we might find limited movement through the thoracic spine, because people are either going to be probably stuck in this thoracic flexion position, struggling to get that extension. So there's a number of ways where this could cause issues, and we're going to go now onto the gym floor and talk about a few exercises that we can do to try and rectify this. So when looking at exercise for people that have a particularly stiff thoracic spine, as we showed in the video before, they haven't got much room for extension vertebrae to vertebrae, they're more suited to rotation. Well, a lot of the issues that people face is they can't breathe properly into the back of the rib cage and expand their rib cage. So two drills that we're going to go through with you is one, an exercise they can do in the warm-up sets or before they come in, just to help expand that rib cage, and then another one to try and open up rotation. So what I'm going to have Kevin do here is going to bring his arms out in front for me and have a little bit of a reach here, and that reach just takes the pec out of it, which is going to be an accessory breathing muscle. Now, I want him to take a big deep breath in through the nose, and as he does, I want him to try and expand his rib cage, pushing into the wall and expanding that space between his shoulder blades. What you'll see here as he breathes in, this is going to reach forward further, not because he's pushing his arms forward, but because he's pushing his back. On the breathe out, I want a long, forceful exhale, trying to bring those rib cage down and engage those obliques and abs. Doing this for sort of 5 to 10 breaths should allow a little bit of extra movement through the shoulder and through the spine, which then you can reinforce with your other exercises. Another drill you could do to improve movement through the spine is a slight modification of the cat camel. We've all seen a cat camel where someone goes into this big hump position and this big extension position. So first off, in this hump position, this is a great way with people with poor breathing mechanics just to stay in this position and breathe a little bit. If he can now breathe in through his nose, into his upper back, he can shut off his chest and his traps and all those accessory breathing muscles. So it's good to spend a bit of time here regardless. But to add some movement into this, what you want to see him do, if he starts in his bottom sort of cat position here, where he's got full extension in his spine that he can get, we're going to start
just from one vertebrae at a time, rotating through the pelvis. This will teach him how to move and tilt through the pelvis and then come into the thoracic spine, up into the upper thoracic, into the cervical. As he comes down now, I want to see that same thing here, just starting one vertebrae at a time, working back down, segmenting that spine and just building awareness and now creating that pelvis forward.
So when we look at the spine, a lot of people when looking at this kind of get this wrong. I see a lot of people trying to force their clients into a lot of thoracic extension because they feel that their clients can't get this extension through the spine very well. But when looking at it, and from an anatomy perspective, it paints a very different picture in terms of what movement is actually available. So starting here at the spine, we've got our cervical spine up here, our 12 thoracic vertebrae, and then we go into our lumbar spine before going to our coccyx and our pelvis. When looking at these lumbar vertebrae, as you can see here, there's a bigger space between these vertebral discs, meaning this is much more suited to flexion extension. So we've got a much greater range of motion through here. Now coming into your thoracic spine, these bits, these spaces, get much shorter. So there's not actually much room for extension. The thoracic spine is much more suited, and where a lot of people are limited is through rotation because it has more ability to do that. What you'll often see that a lot of people go, they're thinking, my client needs more extension, when actually, because of their flared rib cage, because of the pelvis position coming forward, they're already stuck in thoracic extension. So the client will tight through mid-back, and it's not because they actually are lacking extension, it's because they're already in it, and these two bones are already touching. So what we're looking to do if you want to rectify some thoracic extension issues for the majority of your clients is work on getting that full exhale to bring the ribs down, creating some flexion to free up some space to get a little bit of movement, and the work on the pelvis position so the body isn't fighting balance to force us into this flared rib cage position. Then, once you manage that, work a lot on rotation through the thoracic spine, and you may feel a lot of issues go away very quickly.
So now we've freed up the upper back, we're going to go into some thoracic rotation work. So the key thing before we start here, I want a little bit of a posterior tilt to the pelvis and the rib cage are going to be down. This just means we're not moving through the lumbar, we're going to get some movement through the thoracic spine. I'm going to get Kevin to put his hand behind his ear, and I want you to think about first coming round and getting that flexion through the spine as much as you can. And as he comes up, I want him to move from this bit above my hands. So we're coming into this position, rotating from here, then coming back down. Probably worth doing around about 10 each side. On the last one, have a little bit of a hold. If you really want to make this better, you can add a little bit of force in here. So push down to Mikev. 3, 2, 1, then relax and try and rotate a little bit more. That will get a little bit more out of it. And again, this is something you can reinforce in your big lifts in the session.